For those of you that don't know me, my name's Hannah Ellingworth and I'm the manager of the Safeguarding Children's Partnership for North Yorkshire. So we're here as part of Safeguarding Week, and there's loads and loads of sessions that are going on over the course of the week. And we've got the big one tomorrow, which is our Exploitation Summit. What we're going to have a look at this afternoon is just to sort of go through a bit about what the Safeguarding Children Partnership is, what it does. We'll have a look at our Being Young in North Yorkshire strategy. We'll have a look at some learning from reviews, and we'll go through some of the information that we have on our website. I had mentioned at the beginning, but just for those of you who didn't catch it, I'm going to ask for a bit of audience participation. You'll know that sometimes presenting things via Teams can feel a little bit like you're talking to yourself, so it's nice just to get a bit of feedback as we go through. So just to start with, and this can either be via the chat function or if you're comfortable, take yourselves off mute. Does anybody feel confident to answer what the North Yorkshire Safeguarding Children's Partnership is? Okay, let's try a different question then. Has anyone heard of the Safeguarding Children's Partnership before? Shall we see if we can do the thumbs up or thumbs down?
Yes, I've heard of the partnership before.
Well, thank you.
Awareness that it's got the 3 partners and who oversee safeguarding procedures in place for the local authority.
Brilliant, thank you very much.
I was going to say, Hannah, it's such a big question that I didn't know quite where to go because you do such a lot. that's where I was at with it. So I don't really know what to say. All right.
No, that's fair enough. Okay, you're right. It is a big question, and there is a lot, isn't there? So, I suppose briefly, the Safeguarding Children's Partnership is the way in which the local authority, police and health come together to make provision for the safeguarding of children. Now, when people say, what is the partnership? Or what I try and say is that me on my own is not the partnership. The team that I manage is not the partnership. And the strategic leads for police, health and social care are also not the partnership. The partnership is actually everybody that works across North Yorkshire with children and their families. So actually everyone in this room is part of the Safeguarding Children's Partnership. So it's always worth sort of bearing that in mind, I think. So the next question just to think about is, can anybody say what the benefits are of working in partnership? Again, just feel free to come off mute and shout out. We're only a small group.
I think it's understanding what other people are doing and trying to do and what their challenges are and what they can bring.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's about kind of understanding multiple perspectives, isn't it, I think? Anyone else?
I think it's about sharing that good practice.
Yeah,
different agencies' perspective, really.
Yeah, absolutely. Anyone else? Okay, and has anyone got any thoughts about what the challenges to partnership working can be?
I think sometimes it can be because we're all got our own roles and our own policies and procedures, and it's sometimes how we all work together, and information sharing is probably a key thing, isn't it?
It is.
And
if we were
maybe
playing
sometimes those barriers.
Yeah, absolutely. If we were playing partnership bingo, I think information sharing is one that would come up repeatedly. And there are challenges, aren't there, to working with people who have different perspectives and different roles and responsibilities. But there are absolutely some real key benefits to working in partnership. So I went on some training a little while ago, and the trainer was talking about, remember when you were at school and you were thinking about what you were going to do, and there was a group of you that were probably thinking about, well, I'd quite like to work with people. I don't know exactly in what sort of format I want that to take. Some of those people went off and became nurses or doctors or police officers or teachers or social workers. And there'll have been another group of people who weren't thinking about going off and working with children. Neither group is like better or worse than the other, but you probably have more in common with the group of people who wanted to go off and work with children and families. What the lady in the training said was that what can happen when you're working in multi-agency teams is you've got a group of people who started off with a lot in common in that they wanted to go and work with children and families. They did it in slightly different ways. And when people are under stress, time pressures, etc., you can get to a position where when you are like othering the people in the room with you. But actually, the really kind of key important thing is to think about what unites us all. And actually, you've got an awful lot more in common with the people in the room than you would have had if you were in the room with a banker or an estate agent. Not that there's anything wrong with bankers and estate agents, but their perspective, their understanding, their probably social graces and motivations will look really different. So I guess that idea of sort of thinking about what unites us is important. So this is a quote that I heard on the radio a week or so ago when I was preparing for this presentation. And it said, if you want to change things, good ideas aren't enough. You also need good relationships. Now, North Yorkshire's practice model is called Strengths in Relationships. And I just thought it was a really nice quote that I'm going to steal from Radio 4. So just to go into the detail a little bit. So safeguarding children's partnerships work under various parts of legislation. The main one is working together to safeguard children, which I'm sure you're all familiar with. Now, that legislation explains that there are 3 safeguarding organisations that make up a Safeguarding Children's Partnership, and in North Yorkshire, that's North Yorkshire Council, the Humber and North Yorkshire Integrated Care Board, and North Yorkshire Police. That same legislation also says that there are lead safeguarding partners, so they're the people on the top row. So Richard Flinton for North Yorkshire Council, Teresa Fenwick for the ICB, so Health, and Tim Forber for North Yorkshire Police. The legislation also says that those 3 people on the top row delegate their safeguarding responsibilities to the people on the bottom row. Now, I imagine that maybe one of the people on here, maybe 2, might be a bit more familiar to you. So Stuart Carlton, who is the current Director of Children and Young People's Service for the local authority. Paula South, who is the Director of Nursing, and then the Assistant Chief Constable is Catherine Clark. So those 3 people on the bottom row represent the safeguarding organisations at our executive. So they are the decision makers across the partnership. And the key thing to remember is that all 3 safeguarding partners have equal and joint responsibility for the safeguarding arrangements. So one is not more equal than the other one. Should have said at the beginning, but if you've got any questions as we go through, please do feel free just to come off mute and ask as we go. So in terms of the way that the partnership works, so we work under what we call a subgroup model. When I first joined the business unit, it took me a little while to get my head around this. So just a sort of easy way of thinking about it, I think, is that the executive meeting is at the top, and that's the decision-making meeting. And then any safeguarding risks or work that is identified as needing to be undertaken is done in the subgroups, the main one being our practice and learning subgroup. So that's like the engine room of the partnership. So if I just give you a bit of an example, about 2 years ago, the executive identified that there was a potential risk in the way that across the partnership, children who had experienced harmful sexual behaviour were being supported. And because of that potential risk, the executive asked us to set up a task and finish group to look at how we reduce the risk, with the concern being identified that there wasn't a shared approach to how to address harmful sexual behaviour. So a task and finish group was set up, and after some work and discussions, we now have a harmful sexual behaviour strategy and a harmful sexual behaviour toolkit for practitioners. Once that piece of work was done, our practice and learning subgroup oversaw the development of that, and then assurance is provided to the executive to say, you told us to do something about harmful sexual behaviour, this is what we've come up with. And then they happily agreed that that was what was needed, and that's the approach that we're now going to take. So hopefully that makes sense. That's the sort of window into how the work of the partnership kind of moves through the process. So in terms of what the NYSCP does and why, so we talked a bit at the beginning about there being an awful lot of stuff that the partnership does, and I agree that that is absolutely true. So the purpose of the partnership is to ensure that agencies collaborate effectively to promote the welfare of children. And the national legislation says that safeguarding children's partnerships must promote child welfare, must ensure that children grow up in safe environments with their needs being met, that work is coordinated, and that we review serious child safeguarding incidents. And I'll come on to talk a bit more about that a bit later. For North Yorkshire, how we approach it is that our overarching aim is to improve the outcomes for children living in North Yorkshire, and we do that by improving frontline practice. And in North Yorkshire, the way that we do that is we aim to identify safeguarding themes, patterns and trends that are coming up from audits and reviews. We develop strategies, procedures, practice guidance. We translate national legislation, so there will be some legislation that is developed nationally, let's say from the Department for Education, and what we aim to do is translate that into local ways of working, so ensuring that it fits within our strengths in relationship practice model, for example. We also do a lot of horizon scanning, so it's really important that we try and keep on top of what we think upcoming safeguarding risks are. Now, that can obviously be really challenging because none of us can predict the future, but there are certain things that people feel worried about. Does anybody feel able to say what safeguarding things might be coming up on the horizon?
I mean, it's nothing new, but like online safety and how that is just expanding, isn't it? And what will the impacts of things like artificial intelligence will be facing for children, those risks? So that's one thing for me. Yeah,
absolutely.
I think given the news yesterday, grooming and how young people are treated in those scenarios is going to be huge in the next few months, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And actually those two things blended together, so grooming through virtual reality and immersive spaces, so which is interesting but also quite scary, because the legislation is really far behind what the technology currently looks like. So If we think about the virtual reality space, so I don't know whether anyone's ever had the opportunity to use a virtual reality headset. It's really immersive. It feels really, really real. And there are now there's now technology called haptic suits. So you put a suit on with your virtual reality headset, and you can physically feel what it feels like to be in a room, let's say, with, I don't know, thousands of people watching a concert. Now that's really exciting, isn't it? And really fun, but it also opens up a space for harm for children. And as I said, the legislation is really quite far behind in terms of what the technology looks like. Not to terrify everybody, but does anybody know what the yellow square is in the top corner of the screen?
Is that a dating site for young people?
Nearly, yeah. So it's a social media app called Yubo, and the app encourages young people to find new friends by allowing them to swipe left or right and connect with people across the world. Again, there's some real benefits to that, but there are also some concerns as well. So Yubo have been challenged about some of their processes, and particularly around the safeguarding of children. Now, what they've said is that in order to keep children safe, they've got two separate communities. One community is for those people aged 13 to 18, and then the other community is for people over the age of 18. Now, what people who work with children know is that there's a massive difference, isn't there, between a 13-year-old and an 18-year-old. We don't put those two groups of people in schools together, for example. They're certainly not usually in the same classrooms. And we know that there's all sorts of developments that go on between the ages of 13 and 18. What we also know is that an 18-year-old is legally an adult and a 13-year-old absolutely isn't. So there's some, while Yubo was saying that they're mitigating risk, people in the world of safeguarding are concerned that they're not going far enough. You might also hear this being dubbed in the media as the Tinder for teens, which obviously has its own sort of slightly more worrying implications as well. So, as I said earlier, I manage what's called the business unit. So we're responsible for the coordinating all of the work that goes on across the partnership. So we manage the website, we write the practice guidance, we coordinate all of the learning from reviews and audits, and manage all of the work of the subgroups. Another thing that the business unit are responsible for is writing the strategies that that form the work of the frontline practitioners in the partnership. So we want our strategies to be the framework for practitioners to work within. And the main one that I want to draw people's attention to is our Being Young in North Yorkshire strategy. So that we want people to see as the roots of the partnership from which all other strategies grow. So I'm hoping you can see that we've got the Being Young in North Yorkshire tree here. The work of the partnership is fertilised through the ways that we work in that trauma-informed practice way and through our strengths in relationship practice model. And then the other strategies are the branches. So if we think about the early help strategy, you'll see that that one is a zoom-in branch of the bigger Being Young in North Yorkshire strategy. And we're trying to show that in pictures to help people understand how we approach the priorities and the work within the different strategies. We want all our strategies to look like a family. The business unit are fast becoming branding experts, hopefully, and so we want everything to kind of look and feel like we are all part of the same brand. So I'm just going to go into a bit more detail about the Being Young in North Yorkshire strategy. So as I said, that's the overarching strategy. for all of our partners, and we really want it to help practitioners understand that safeguarding is everyone's responsibility, and that people can see how we coordinate the work and what we do in order to improve frontline practice. There's lots of really great work that's happened over the course of the previous Being Young in North Yorkshire strategy. So just to give a couple of examples. So we have an annual DSL conference. We'll be doing our 4th one this year in September. In terms of schools, since 2022, no school has been judged inadequate due to safeguarding. We run campaigns, so the suicide prevention campaign as an example, the YouTube channel, we now have a formal channel, so we're named, which means that we can promote it further and get more likes and views, which means that we're spreading the message. We've done something called our Ask Me campaign, and there's loads and loads of other bits of work that have gone on that obviously we wouldn't be able to put on just one slide. But it's right, I think, that we recognise the achievements across the partnership. So in order to come up with the priorities for Being Young in North Yorkshire, we've done a lot of consultation work. So we've consulted with partners, we've also consulted with children, and it's been designed from the ground up. So children have been involved in the development of it, as have frontline practitioners. The most important thing we think about when we're looking at our strategies and all of our work is the wishes and feelings of children and how their best interests can remain central to the decision making of the partnership. So in terms of what Being Young in North Yorkshire says, so we have got our 4 priorities, which are for children to be happy, healthy, safe and achieving. And then within each of those priorities, we've got areas of focus. So we want to focus on children's mental health and emotional well-being. We also want to focus on making sure that children get the right support at the right time through our early help system. And you'll hear the language around early help system rather than service, because early help is a system of support rather than a small part of the local authorities' offer of targeted early help, which is different. Within the healthy priority, we want children to start well and live well, and we want to try and reduce health inequalities. We're going to look at child exploitation and contextual safeguarding, and you've mentioned that earlier about the work that's come out through Baroness Casey's review, so we'll be thinking about the learning from that. And then, of course, we want to protect children who are at risk of harm. Most children in North Yorkshire live safe and happy lives, but for the children that don't, we need to try extra hard to protect them. In terms of achieving, we will be thinking about education and inclusion, and then transitions. And that's transitions not just from child to adult services, but it's key transition points throughout children's lives. You'll also see on this slide, which is our plan on a page, that we've included our signs of success. Now, all of our signs of success are based around what children will tell us, so we know we've been successful. All of the work that we do is relatively pointless if children don't feel that they're safer or happier, or that they can achieve their goals. And all of that is in our mind when we're thinking about the work that we do. I'm just going to skip through these slides if you don't mind, but I'll make sure that I send them out to everybody. So, as I said, in terms of how we know we've achieved our goals, children will tell us that we've achieved them, and we know from children they will definitely tell us if they don't think we have. And then in terms of our measurables, we will think about what actions we need to do in order to focus on how to achieve success. So we will have an action plan that will look at the various priorities and areas of focus. And again, that action plan will be managed through our practice and learning subgroup, and we will report on the successes over the 4 years through our annual reports. So I mentioned at the beginning that I was going to come on to just have a bit of a look at our learning from reviews. So the partnership do an awful lot of reviewing of incidents and audits. There are certain criteria for safeguarding incidents to be reviewed, because not all safeguarding incidents could be reviewed, because there's sadly too many. Nationally, there is a panel called the National Child Safeguarding Practice Review Panel, and when a child dies or is seriously injured, consideration needs to be given to notifying that panel, but there is a set criteria for when notification needs to be made. So it's where a child has died or is seriously injured. And just as an example, bruises or limb fractures in children on their own wouldn't normally be considered serious. Now, that isn't to say that they're not serious for that child and their family, because of course they are. But in order to reach the criteria for notification, it would usually need to be accompanied by internal injuries, or the child be injured to an extent that it would have either a life-limiting or lifelong impact on the child. We also think about the extent, repetition, etc. of the abuse or neglect. Now, within the partnership, we've got really good relationships between our strategic leads. And if we become aware of an incident in North Yorkshire, the strategic leads will have a discussion about whether it reaches the threshold to notify the national panel. The ultimate responsibility for notification sits with the local authority, so they make the decision. But as I said, in North Yorkshire, we approach it from a partnership perspective. If the local authority ultimately decide to notify, then we have 15 working days to complete what's called a rapid review. And in North Yorkshire, the way that we approach that rapid review is that we have a first meeting to look at key lines of inquiry, and then a report's written in the intervening period between the first and the second meeting. And at that second meeting, the report is reviewed. And the key point of writing the report is to look at recommendations that might help to improve future frontline practice. Now, I think one of the most important things for people to bear in mind, because it might be at some point you either have or might in the future be part of the rapid review process, the most important thing to bear in mind is that the process is approached through the lens of that child's safeguarding incident. However, it is not about looking at what individual practitioners did or did not do. It's about thinking, what would a typical practitioner in that same set of circumstances do, because of the guidance and the strategies and the way in which we work in North Yorkshire? And are there areas that we could support typical practitioners to improve their practice by looking at the strategic approach to the practice? So hopefully that makes sense. As I said, it is absolutely not about looking at individual named practitioners. It's much more of a kind of high level bird's eye view. So again, if people are sort of feeling brave enough to do it, what I'd like is just for us to have a little bit of a look at this case study, and then we can maybe have a think about some of the ways that we approach the questions. So this is a case study for child A, who was 8 weeks old, and sibling B, who was 5 years old. So mum had moved to the UK 6 years ago, and dad had lived in North Yorkshire since birth. Both parents were in full-time employment, and both had engaged with planned midwife and health visitor appointments. Mum had disclosed having some mental health difficulties following the birth of sibling B, and dad had indicated that he had found school challenging as a child. Child A was seen for all of their appointments prior to and after birth, and home visits were conducted by health services, who noted no concerns in the family home. Sibling B was in reception year at school, and school were in the process of completing an early help assessment due to concerns that sibling B was finding it hard to manage in a classroom environment. School had previously submitted a safeguarding referral for sibling B, as mum had been seen to have a bruise to her eye, and sibling B had said that they sometimes felt scared at home. When child A was 8 weeks old, dad called 111 with concerns that child A had a pain in the leg, which seemed worse when pressure was applied to it. And as a result of that, both parents attended A&E, and child A was seen to have bruises on their tummy and shoulder and a lump on their head. After a child protection medical, child A was found to have limb and rib fractures at different stages of healing, and these were confirmed by a second medical assessment 2 weeks later. Both parents were arrested, and child A and sibling B now reside with family under interim care orders. So, in thinking about that case, I've got a couple of questions that I thought we could just have a think about as a group. If we aim to approach those questions again, thinking about what a typical practitioner might do in those circumstances. So if maybe somebody could, people could just have a bit of a think about what information would you want to know about how practitioners approached their work with the family. I'll give you a minute just to have a bit of a think. Does anyone have any thoughts?
I'd probably want to know, what discussions had they had with parents? Had they asked about any bruises? And then probably with the child, where they were saying they were, I can't remember the wording now, was it scared, exploring that further, having some professional curiosity around what they both were saying.
Brilliant, thank you.
I think probably some inquisitorial questions around mum's mental health, and probably the difficulties that family were having, a bit more to know what barriers they were facing at the moment.
Yeah, great, thank you.
I think potentially looking at the relationships, because if the family had agreed to an early help assessment, they weren't adverse to having support. So were enough opportunities made at that point to build those relationships? Well, consent was there for that intervention.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's definitely, and the case study is deliberately a bit vague, isn't it? So there's definitely a lot of information that I think people would want to know, but that idea of practitioners being professionally curious in order to try and ask more questions and understand what's going on for the family. So, for example, when dad had said that he found school difficult, did practitioners ask questions about that? So did they consider that maybe dad had a undiagnosed learning need, and then if he did, was consideration given to how information was shared with dad. So that's the way in which we approach the questions about when we do the rapid reviews. So hopefully that just gives a bit of an insight. As I said, then the next step, once we've understood the circumstances, is to then think about what recommendations we would make to improve frontline practice, which we'll come on to. So this is a roadmap of the way in which the rapid review process worked. So, as I said, Dad made a call to 111, and the call handler did a really excellent job in this case, and they did at the moment that they were talking to Dad, they did a referral to the local hospital, letting them know that they were sending child A and family to the hospital for a review. They also sent an electronic record to the child's GP, which meant that the GP obviously had an awareness of the call that had been made. And what that provided was child A was safety netting. So had parents not taken child A to A&E, there would have been follow-up around that. Once child A was in A&E, they were reviewed early by a consultant paediatrician and they were admitted to hospital. A referral was made to the MAST, which was screened by a multi-agency group, so with police, health and the local authority, and they recommended that a strategy meeting was convened. At the point of strategy meeting, the recommendation was made for a child protection medical. Now, you'll have noticed that I said when I was going through the case study that the injuries to child A were confirmed following the second child protection medical. So in cases of young babies, it's necessary to do 2 medicals, one when the concerns first arise and then the second one a couple of weeks later, because healing fractures are more visible on X-ray. So at the point that the results of the second medical came back, a multi-agency discussion took place and agreement was made to notify the national panel, and that is at the point there where we have our 2 rapid review meetings, and the report is then submitted within 15 days. Now, as I said, the most important thing about that report is to think about what recommendations we can make and what good practice there was identified. So for child A and in other reviews that we've done, we see that there are a lot of really good tailored conversations with families. So taking into consideration families' specific circumstances and talking to them about how their circumstances either increase risk or what strengths they have in order to try and ensure children's safety and or well-being. This isn't just about what happens within the safeguarding arena, this is also true of work in the early help system. We saw that there were lots of points through contact with professionals where domestic abuse was asked about with mum. We didn't see any evidence of dad being asked about domestic abuse, and I think that is an area for development. There was lots of work done with the family around our day or night sleep right campaign. Maybe people aren't quite as well aware of the ICON work that we've done, which is Babies Cry, I Can Cope, and this is a campaign to reduce head trauma in children, and there were lots of conversations that took place with the family around that as well. We also found that the guidance that we've got on our website was followed about injuries to non-mobile babies. In terms of recommendations, now, as I said, you could play bingo really with some of these recommendations through a number of our reviews. So professional curiosity is one that comes up, and that isn't to say that people don't act in professionally curious ways. And what we also have to be really mindful of is that we're reviewing cases with the benefit of hindsight. We also recognise that people are really busy, and if you've got, let's say, 4 or 5 visits in a day to do, we need to recognise the perimeters in which people are working. So we will always encourage people to be professionally curious, but we do recognise that we're looking at things with the benefit of hindsight. The recommendations around information sharing. So again, we know that people will share information, but sometimes there is evidence that information isn't always shared in the most helpful of ways. This is quite often in relation to information pertaining to fathers. So, and that can be fathers who are present and part of the family unit. Again, similarly with record keeping, there are instances where record keeping is done really well, and then sometimes there's instances where there's room for development. In terms of the child voice, so we're doing some work on this at the moment, particularly thinking about how we support practitioners to understand the voice of children, particularly those who aren't able to communicate verbally. And that leads on to us also thinking about and helping practitioners take what we call a both and stance. So that work is really stemming from reviews into children where they are displaying behaviours that challenge the adults. And what we find is that practitioners will or can look at a child's behaviours and start thinking about neurodiversity. What we're encouraging is for practitioners to also recognise that a child might be neurodiverse, but the behaviours that they're displaying might also be related to trauma, because we know that neurodiverse behaviours and trauma-related behaviours can look quite similar. And the other important thing to think about is that a child could be neurodiverse, but they also could have trauma, and that is where the both and stance comes in. So it could be trauma, it could be neurodiversity, and it could be both. So, sorry, before I move on, has anybody got any questions regarding the review process?
I do actually.
Yeah.
If that's okay, yeah.
Yeah,
How much do you use sort of information from the school at that stage? Do you use sort of like the CPOMS network and stuff like that, or do you interview school staff, look at kind of interventions that they've been doing? You know, because the school staff spend an awful lot of time with children, and will recognise changes in children as well. So I just wondered how much that's involved, how much the school is involved.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we have on our on rapid review meetings for school-aged children, we will have somebody from the school improvement service. Joanna is here from that service actually, and the representative on the review meeting will take responsibility for liaising with that school. So we make sure that we do get the school's information, because as you say, it is really vitally important that for school-aged children we understand what that child's lived experience has been, and more often than not, the school is the best able to provide that information to us. So we did a local review fairly recently, and it was really useful to understand a sort of timeline of the concerns that were being raised by schools. So we did look at information that they'd had on CPOMS. We looked at the safeguarding referrals that school had submitted and the communication that school had between parents as well. So yeah, it's a really good question, and absolutely the school information is vital. So
thank you.
Okay, no worries. So I've been asked just to draw your attention to the partnership intelligence form. So this is from North Yorkshire Police. So North Yorkshire Police rely on intelligence from communities in order to understand the kind of context around worries, either for individual children or for areas across the county. In terms of completing the partnership intel form, this doesn't need to have been communicated with the family that you're worried about. It's about sharing intelligence rather than submitting a safeguarding referral. If you have specific worries about a child and there are safeguarding concerns, then you would follow your usual processes. But intel can be submitted to North Yorkshire Police either via our website or via the police website, and I'll make sure that the links are live when the slides go out to you. So I thought I'd just have a little bit of a look at the resources and the different bits of things that we've got on our partnership website. So, and again, we can make sure that you get, we can email out some copies of these resources to you. So when we've done the reviews and we've got the learning and that's all been agreed, of course, the most important thing is that that people working with children and families understand what the recommendations are, and then how they can kind of implement them in practice. So we do summary documents of all of the audits and reviews that we've done. And what we are aiming to do with all of them, you'll see on this slide, on this last page here, we're including questions for reflection. So we'll give a summary of whichever the review is that's been done, and a summary of the good practice and areas for development. And then we're including questions for reflection. And what we're suggesting to people is that these are questions that can be discussed in team meetings or through group supervision or one-to-ones or just with colleagues if you feel like they're relevant when you're working with a particular child. And then we're also including an area of additional resources. So if you've got if there's more information that you want to try and find out, we're including that on these summary documents as well. What we're really asking of everybody is to have a think about how these documents can be used either in your teams or with your colleagues, because as I said, the most important thing about all of the learning that we do is that it gets out there, because if it doesn't, then you know what we're doing isn't working. In terms of the website, we've also got lots and lots of other resources on there. So some of you will be familiar with the Be Aware page on our website. So that has got everything that you will need to look at in terms of child exploitation. Again, we want our website in general to be a kind of one-stop shop for all practitioners. So we recognise that there's no way people could hold all of the procedures, practice guidance, 1-minute guides in their head, but everybody just needs to know where to go to look for them, and our website should be that place. You'll also see on our website that we have our annual report. So the partnership work is accountable to the DFE, and therefore we have to write annual reports to demonstrate all of the work that goes on across the partnership. We also fairly recently have started putting on our website national learning and reports. So there is an awful lot of national reviews and legislation that comes out. And so as a business unit, we try and keep on top of all of those legislative changes and the reviews that relate to children. Once we are aware that a report or a review's been done, we will summarise it and put it on our website on the National Learning and Reports page. And then if necessary, we'll try and translate some of the learning from those national reviews into local practice for people in North Yorkshire. Again, so we've got procedures, practice guidance and 1-minute guides. You will also hear us talking about toolkits. So again, this is thinking about, as a frontline practitioner, how can we make it as easy as possible for frontline practitioners to work with children and their families, because you want to get on and do your day job in the best way that you can. And our responsibility is to try and make that as easy as possible. So I've talked before about the harmful sexual behaviour toolkit. So that came out of the direction from the executive, but actually the way that that was formatted was through conversations with practitioners, because practitioners are the people that are doing the work day in, day out. If it doesn't work for them, then it's not working. So what we do with our toolkits and other pieces of guidance is we test them out through our practitioner forum. So we'd really like everybody to kind of spread the word about the practitioner forum. It's a really great space for practitioners and managers to get involved in the development of strategies and practice guidance. And it really makes sure that the work that we're doing is really impactful. As I said, if it's not working for frontline practitioners, then we need to do something different. So the next one is the 10th of September. If anybody wants an invite to it, just email me or email the NYSCP and we will make sure that you get an invite. You can come to one and then not come to a couple. Like there's no you don't have to come to everyone, but it's really, they're a really helpful space, I think. So we've got a busy second half of 2025. We are in the process of rewriting the early help strategy. As I've mentioned earlier, that will really start to think about early help as a system rather than a service. And we will be looking at our threshold guidance. Both of those strategies will be discussed in the practitioner forum and in our other subgroups. So we also have a working with education subgroup that's been formally adopted as part of the partnership. So if education colleagues would like to be part of that group, please again let me know. So we're updating our resources in terms of our self-harm suicide ideation toolkit, the Voice of the Child toolkit, and we're looking at a neglect toolkit as well. We are currently in Safeguarding Week. The Exploitation Summit is tomorrow. We do have a couple of spare spaces now, so if anybody again has the ability to attend tomorrow, please let me know and we'll get you on the list. And then we've got our 4th DSL conference on the 23rd of September. For those of you not aware, we also deliver monthly learning events. So these are sessions either put on by the business unit or by partners, and we try and align what we're putting on in the events with, again, learning from reviews. So for example, in October, we've got the Voice of the Child toolkit being launched, and that's on the back of a number of reviews where we've identified needing to strengthen the work around the voice of children. These are our QR codes for our training and learning pages and for our practice guidance. I've just included some additional reading for anyone that's wants some bedtime reading maybe, and these are our key links. Again, you can find pretty much everything to do with us on our website. Our YouTube channel is another really useful place to go because we've got all of our historical training sessions on there, or the majority of them at least. And that is it for me from formal